Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Gig Harbor City Council study session of Thursday, April 14th, 2022. The time is 2:04 p.m. and I will turn it to our city clerk for a roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Barber.
Here.
Councilmember Denson.
Here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Likens.
Here.
Councilmember Rodenberg.
Here.
Councilmember Storsett. Have we heard from him?
He may be traveling this week. I believe he is excused from this meeting.
Yeah, he's traveling this week and he said he might or might not be available for this meeting. So
If he joins, we'll acknowledge him.
yeah.
And Councilmember Wook.
Here.
We have 6 of 7 present. And Mayor, before we get started, if I could just take a minute, I'd like to introduce our new Assistant City Clerk, Tiffany Allement. I think Tiffany's had a chance to meet a few of you in person, but just wanted to introduce her to council so you can all see her face and get to know her. You'll be dealing a lot with her and me going forward. So
Yes, we're very lucky to have you, Tiffany. Thank you for a great first week so far.
Thank you. I'm excited.
She's come back every day. I know I've made that joke many times, but I'm still gonna.
He keeps coming back. It's a good sign.
Really good sign.
Yeah. So our first item of discussion this afternoon is our UGA analysis, and this will be Carl DeSimas, our principal planner. Hi, Carl.
Hello, thank you, Mayor. Hello, members of council and others. I have with me today Andrew Bjorn as well from Burke Consulting, and Jeff Langhill may jump in on a portion of this as well. Let me just share my screen here. I've got a brief PowerPoint for you that I'll run through first. Is that showing up for everyone?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. And I just realized that I have the date wrong there. I apologize. I do recognize it is April 14th and not April 13th. Sorry about that.
You're excused.
Thank you. Okay, so today, yeah, we are bringing back for the second time a review of the urban growth area assessment and analysis that staff has been working on with Burke. Just quickly, in a nutshell, this report is meant to create annexation guidelines to help in future decision-making relative to annexation. The graphic that you're looking at there provides an overview of the steps that we took to reach this end. Staff worked with the Planning Commission and Burke Consulting from August through December of 2021 to develop this report. And during the last meeting, studying the report, Planning Commission recommended some final changes that were incorporated into the version brought before you at the last council study session and here today. Council reviewed the report at your study session on March 10th. And at that meeting, council asked staff and Burke to consider some changes to the report and look at some additional data. The changes in research are listed on this slide, and staff has provided you with 2 versions of the report for your consideration. One with track changes depicting the changes made and one clean version. Note that the changes to the strategy map are not included in the report, but will be covered in this presentation. So first, we amended 2 of the strategic area titles for clarity and consistency throughout this document. As you can see here, we changed the planned potential annexation areas to phased potential annexation areas. And we also changed the urban servicing management areas to long-term management areas. And the long-term management area did exist in the original, but it was sort of used interchangeably with the urban servicing management areas, and that was confusing. So we eliminated the urban servicing management and just went straight with long-term management. We also prioritized the strategic approaches and areas, as can be seen on this slide. So there was some discussion about prioritizing those strategies such that council could then know exactly which we should be focused on in the near term and which we should be focused on in the long term. And I see Councilmember Wook, you have your hand up. I could, if we'd like to stop, I could ask or answer any questions, Mayor, if that's okay.
Yes, so I was just going to ask if you'd like to answer questions along the way or at the end of your presentation.
It's either way is fine with me.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Councilmember Wood.
Thank you. What is the definition of the long-term management and the definition of local-led potential annexation areas, local-led?
So the long-term management area would be, so I'll just read, I'm reading from the report. There may be no strong rationale for annexing part or all of certain UGAs in the short or long term. However, urban sewer servicing would still be required. So these areas would be retained as UGAs, but the city would not pursue or encourage annexation. So that's the long term. And you asked about the local lead, Councilmember.
I did.
Local lead, so it'd be desirable to annex certain smaller UGAs or portions of larger UGAs. Given the size of those areas, annexation would require extensive planning and coordination. So in these areas, the city would encourage property owners and residents and businesses, if applicable, and local organizations to follow one of the direct petition methods to begin annexation. So in other words, those annexation areas would approach the city to become annexed, and it could be that we would look at smaller areas, depending.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Carl, can you go back to the long-term management area definition? You said that although they're either not considered to be annexable or we want to annex them either in the short or the long term, you said they would still need to be serviced by sewers, our sewer system?
Potentially, depending on the circumstances.
So could you give me an example where we had an area that we weren't really particularly interested in annexing? It was under the long-term management area. Under what scenario would we be obliged to provide them with our sewer system or connect them?
Well, one scenario could be an emergency where we have where they have potentially a septic system failure, and we run into that once in a while, where you know, a condominium or a house has a septic system issue, and they request to hook up to the city for sewer. I think, and Jeff, you might want to jump in here, but I think the other scenario would be where we might have a development going into the UGA, a subdivision, and they request to hook up to our sewer system. So we are not necessarily obliged to extend sewer to those areas according to our code, but we do have the option to do so. And Jeff, do you want to clarify that just to make sure I've got that right?
Sure. Essentially, if the property is looking to be developed in a manner that the county would not allow a on-site septic system, a drain field, then if the property would need to connect the city sewer. If they want to stay in the county, they do a utility extension agreement. But if they want to, but that costs, as I think we discussed last time, that costs both for the general facilities charge to connect and the monthly payment 150% of what in-city residents pay. So there is an incentive for those properties to annex into the city to pay a lower sewer general facility charge and monthly rate. But so I'll stop there if that answered your question, Councilmember Henderson.
Yeah, under the scenario of an emergency, let's say Canterwood system fails, and would we be paying for the connection and upgrades? I mean, or a large apartment complex. I mean, that doesn't have to be Canterwood, but any area that's in a long-term management area, if they had an emergency and there was a decision made by somebody, I guess it may be the city, to connect them, would those costs fall on the city?
I've never heard of those costs falling on the city.
Okay.
And the entity that would require connection would be the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. The city wouldn't require that. It would be the health department that says, you do not have the ability to rehabilitate your drain field, put in a new drain field, whatever. And then that would except for maybe an example where there's a grant, the city wouldn't be paying for those. No, it would be the property owner.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you jumping in on that. All right, I'll move along here. Okay, and talking about sewer, at the last meeting, sewer fees in the UGA were discussed and some questions framed around them. So as we know, sewer fees are higher for those folks in the UGA who are hooked up to the city system. Jeff and his team provided us with some analysis to show what current revenues look like and what could potentially be lost where the UGA might still develop. What we don't know at this point is what the difference in revenues would look like area by area for those who are currently hooked up to city sewer. Staff would need more time to drill down through the data to get a full picture of both current and future for each area. We'd also like to add that we may want to add a clarifying statement to the section currently included in the report that states something along the lines of the fact that this information relative to sewer fees is for informational purposes only and should not be used to decide whether an area should be annexed or not. And Jeff, this is another good time probably for you to jump in and clarify a little bit about that.
Sure. The intent is to provide this information so the city council can understand the impacts of annexing specific sub areas, but the information is not provided so that there's an interest to keep sewer fees higher in these areas than it would be otherwise if they're annexed. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to not annex someone because their sewer fees would go down. This is just so the city council can understand what the impacts will be. And then if an area is annexed, then we just go through a utility rate study and see if we need to obtain more revenues by just raising overall rates.
So if I can ask a quick question.
I was muted. Sorry.
The language on the left says the net foregone revenue is 210,000 a year. The bar chart on the right says this is the net yearly reduction in sewer fees. And if I add those numbers up, they're way more than 200,000. So what's the difference?
Just to interject quickly, it's the third bullet. So existing UGA development is just 210,000.
Okay.
Yeah, the future potential development is allocated.
On the graph. Okay.
My apologies for not including a title with that. That's one of the reasons, for example, why Madrona Links is 0, why Point Fosdick is 4,000, but Peacock Hill is so high.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and that's kind of what I was saying in when introducing the slide is that we don't have the data aggregated and drilled down far enough to get to those numbers for the existing UGA development at the moment, and we could get there, but it would definitely take more analysis and time. And so if council were interested in having that data included in this report, we would have to look at how much time that might take. And that's a conversation that I would then go and have with Jeff. Jeff, I see you unmuted, so maybe you want to talk more about that too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Thank you, Carl, that it would take city staff, both our utility billing folks and our GIS coordinator, some time to dig into parcel by parcel information to see what exact net change will occur on sewer fees. This is just intended to give you an example of what it could look like.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd recommend not digging any deeper in this. This is just I think the intent is it's a snapshot in time, number one. And number two, it provides the city and city staff and the council protocols for how we'll look at any annexation in the future. So digging into it, getting exact numbers right now are going to be out of date in a year. And my hope is that if any annexation were to happen, we'd also be looking at the long-term maintenance costs to the city as well, which are difficult to capture in a document like this. I mean, things like maintenance of the streets, sidewalks, lighting systems, everything else that would fall onto the city and become a long-term maintenance cost. Those would have to be taken into account as well. So yeah, I think this is a good snapshot in time. I think it gives you an idea of what's going on, but to dig in any deeper, I think may not be worth the time and effort.
Yes, Andrew?
Oh, just a point of information about that. When you had just mentioned talking about maintenance of city streets, that actually is included in our analysis. It's there are some other elements of infrastructure where, like looking at park capital acquisition costs that were a little bit more high level, but we did include roads.
And one last comment about sewer fees. You're not going to see all these areas annexed into the city all at once. So even if no development occurs in the next 10 years, you're not going to see all these areas annexed, and it's all of a sudden $200,000 drop in revenue from the sewer fund. Second, given that those things will all occur slowly over time, and given that we do rate studies every 3 to 5 years, we will be able to anticipate what the revenue needs are for the sewer function and set the rates according to what they need to be, regardless of whether a piece of property is in the city or outside of the city.
Councilmember Wook?
There's no requirement that we do annex, isn't that correct?
Well, that's a good question, Councilmember Wook. From the county's perspective, they would say that there is, and that they would like us to annex all of our UGA. Really, they would like us to do it in the near term, but you know, even in the long term. But you are correct. There is no at this point, as long as we do not need capacity based on our buildable lands analysis, then there is not necessarily a requirement for us to annex these areas. That would only come up likely if we were needing to take reasonable measures in order to meet our growth targets under Vision 2050.
Right, which we probably don't need that. And so while they might like it, there is no requirement.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Likens?
Yeah, I just have a question regarding, just to tag on to Jenny's question. I thought I remember reading something when I was studying the Growth Management Act that the UGA are lands that the city expects to annex within 20 years, or there was a timeline associated. Is there like a timeline, or is it like what I'm hoping, like what Jenny asked, that we don't have to annex and we can just keep passing that timeline down?
Let me take a crack at it, and then Andrew, if you've got some ideas about that, please chime in too. So while it is in growth management, and that is how growth management is set up to work, you know, looking at our planning horizon,
Sure.
And looking at what we, you know, the UGA is fitting into that, and what we are supposed to, how we're supposed to grow. As far as I know, there is not a requirement for us to annex within that planning horizon. We are supposed to plan for it.
Okay.
And if the need arises, then we would do it, and we would have that capacity to be able to grow. And Andrew, I'll turn it over to you for a second, but you know, I think that it's a little bit ambiguous, and I think that there are a lot of those questions are being asked currently at both Growth Management Coordinating Committee, the PCRC. You know, a lot of these regional growth strategies and strategists are asking these questions right now, I think. So it's a really good question, and I don't know if I have a real straightforward answer, but Andrew, do you have a more straightforward answer, or would it be pretty much the same?
I could go down the academic road and talk for an hour about this. I think the main point is that the original intent of having urban growth areas is to have a land bank available for development, that you'd annex it over time as you would need to grow. Obviously, in a lot of communities, that's not how unincorporated areas and UGAs and potential annexation areas work. And I mean, you can tell, for example, that there are some annexed areas, there are some potential annexation areas across Washington State that are developed at density that are fully built out.
Mhm.
So I think that it's something where there are areas that you want to plan for, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't avoid the fact that there is a separate annexation process, and that in many cases, especially in the past, that was mainly citizen-led or landowner-led, and that's not something that that's not something as a city that the city can necessarily push. So.
Great. Okay, thanks both. Thank you.
I will tell you, there's another reason for UGAs that really doesn't apply here, but I'll tell it to you very quickly. In Pierce, King, and Snohomish counties, you've got a lot of little cities that used to have land in between them that was in the county. And in order to figure out which way some of those pieces of properties and some of those areas would go, cities adopted a UGA that would then abut the other cities. And so City A would have this area and they'd get first shot at annexing it versus City B that was right next door. So it kind of stopped some of those political squabbles as to which areas went where, and stopped cities from just poaching all the really good stuff, all the commercial property in particular. Doesn't apply here though, because we don't have that kind of thing.
And that's been playing out with, for example, the Highline area between Burien and Seattle. I mean, that's been going on for 30 years.
Andrew, I managed in that area for 20 years, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I was a manager in Des Moines and Burien.
Councilmember Rundberg.
Yes, I guess I have a couple of questions. One, Carl, not all of the potential annexation properties are residential. Aren't some of the areas commercial zoned?
There are some commercial areas within our UGA, primarily in the Purdy area.
So the follow-up to that is that we shouldn't necessarily look at annexation and the cost associated with that all as it would reference residential areas. There may be reasons to annex commercial areas to bring in some kind of industry or something where the infrastructure is less. However, I think the tax base is greater. So I didn't want council to think it's, maybe they don't, but they might think that we're all talking residential and only residential type sewer systems and infrastructure.
Councilmember Barber.
Yes, my question is kind of a follow-up to Lee's question, and I'm thinking particularly of Madrona Links, which is not residential, and I'm wondering about the designations on these, because if having Madrona Links, if PennMat was to sell Madrona Links, we would want to be able to protect that property, but I'm curious what the time frame is to change that from long-term management where we have it now into a phased or some other process, so that it would be easier, faster for us to annex that, so that we could have some, shall we say, influence over how that property was developed within our codes instead of Pierce County's.
Councilman Barber, it's a great question. It's something that I was gonna bring up a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay, then I can wait.
Well, we could talk about it now. Well, no, let's wait, actually, if you don't mind. That'd be great. And then we can cover that, because it is discussed. Okay, I'll move on, because I think that's coming up in just a couple slides. I know you have other things to discuss today, so I don't want to take up all the time. So let me move on from this slide. Another thing that we discussed at the last meeting was Purdy and the known infrastructure issues with water and sewer in that area. And so we just simply added an acknowledgement in the report that is something that would want to be considered if annexation were looked at in the Purdy area. So just a very brief acknowledgement of that. This item was not included in the report, but it was something that we discussed briefly last time. And the idea here is to add some further clarity around what the different strategic areas actually mean. So, you know, like I showed earlier, we've prioritized these strategic areas now. But what does that actually mean as far as planning? And so we added these term limit or these term definitions or identifiers, I should say, to each of the strategic areas. And we would add this to the strategy map that's contained in the report. And it would just help to give us an idea of, you know, when these things are supposed to happen, you know, short term to long term. Okay, and then this gets into the discussion, Councilmember Barber, that you were just bringing up. And interestingly, I think at the last meeting, one of the areas we did talk about was Madrona Links, and what we heard from Council at that meeting was that Madrona Links might be an area that we would consider removing from the UGA. And I'm hearing the opposite from you and what you're saying here. So let's talk about that in just a second. But we also heard from Council that there was interest in changing the strategic area of Canterwood, as well as the northern part of the Peacock Hill strategic area. I think it was just those that were changed. And so looking at this slide, you can see the slide on the left is how it looked when we presented previously. And the slide on the right is the changed strategic areas. Oh, I should say then we also changed the southern part of Peacock Hill to be in the local led potential annexation area. So sort of moving it up out of the phased potential annexation area. And so I apologize if we got that wrong as far as Madrona Links goes. But that is kind of that was our recollection of what we heard at the last meeting.
Councilmember Rodenberg.
Yes, Carl, is the map on the right-hand side, is that due to Council's input?
Yes, it is.
I would think that the map on the left was put together by professionals, and I'm not sure that we want to, without further discussion, a lot more study, just 7 council people, none of which are professional planners, would we want to do that? I'm quite interested in why city staff chose the map on the left. So I'd hate to see us go forward with just what we discussed lightly in the prior meeting.
Just speaking to that really quickly, Councilman Rodenberg, you know, we did look at this and consider it, and Andrew and his team at Burke looked at the recommendations from Council relative to the report, and they were comfortable with these changes that are shown on the right. And Andrew, if I'm speaking out of turn, or if you would like to add any clarification to that, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the two main things, like the two main changes that are here are to Canterwood and to Madrona Links. And with respect to Madrona Links, I think that the point that was made a little bit, I'm so sorry that I can't remember your name, but the point that was made a little bit earlier about you know, the long-term disposition of the golf course, it does make sense. I think that the question is more of what should that area, like how should that area be managed, given that there's a small residential development in the southeast corner and everything else is pretty much owned by PennMet.
If you guys are comfortable with the map on the right, then I certainly am.
Okay.
Councilmember Wook.
Yes, so I am comfortable with the map on the right with the Canterwood and the Peacock, northern Peacock Hill area being in the long term. I think that's appropriate considering what it might force the rest of the city to build into density to take into consideration an area that is not so dense. And we have to, if we've got the area, we're going to have to build someplace. And so I just assume keep that area out of the city as long as we can. Thank you.
Councilmember Barber.
I'm sorry, I'm really confused. I thought that if we annex them, there were more strict growth areas because we had more control over them than we did if they were in Pierce County. So, and I don't remember the discussion about moving Canterwood into the longer term. And I guess I would rather see it in the same phase as, I guess I'm looking at my map, as the Peacock Hill, where it was. And I'd rather see Madrona Links back into the long term, but I'd like to hear from Carl and Andrew about whether I'm totally confused on this whole thing or not, and what their thoughts are. I'm kind of with Lee that I don't know that the 7 of us can make this decision in 2 study sessions, as opposed to the professionals doing it.
I'll speak to the first part of the question, Councilmember Barber, and then I'll let Andrew speak to the second part. As far as the first part goes, you're correct. If we annex the areas, then those lands fall under our development regulations and our code and our public works standards. So we do have more land use control, more concurrency control over those areas. So that is true. I think the idea of making these changes is to say that these areas are not areas that would necessarily benefit the city in the near term if they were annexed, but they could benefit the city potentially in the long term. Where Madrona Links is concerned, that is because it is largely is a golf course at this point. There wouldn't be a lot of benefit to the city in annexing the golf course. And Andrew, I know you've got more thoughts on the golf course issue than I do, so please feel free to jump in on that.
I guess, Carl, I have 2 follow-up questions then. Could you define short-term versus long-term? When you say, it's not in our short-term interest, what are we talking? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 1 year? And then I guess my concern on the golf course is that my husband's an avid golfer at Madrona, but there are golf courses closing all over the country. And so to me, that's something that we need to look at. And I would sure rather have us be able to preserve some of that than have it turned into condos.
I'll answer that first question, Councilman Barber. I think that the short term, while we don't have it defined in the report because we're just sort of adding these terms in as a result of the last discussion, in my mind, the short term is within the next few years. So I would say it's probably 1 to 5 years we'd be looking at annexing those areas. Local lead would probably be more like a 5 to 10 year span, and the long-term management area is more on the 10 to 20 year span. So still, fairly large, but it's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen in the future. So, we necessarily have to have longer terms. Andrew, you want to jump in on the second question there?
So in terms of Madrona Links, I do agree. I think that you can look at Bothell Bothell and Pacific, and there are a few other cases where golf courses have closed and some of the land has been sold off for development. Other land has been placed into parkland. I think that overall, there are a lot of different options that council has here. I think that what we've been providing in terms of a map is both what we think of as, as being informed by the results of the analysis that we have provided. But there also needs to be some consideration as well about, council's perspective on where they want the city to grow, how they want it to grow. So I think that if it's the case, and the map on the left, Canterwood and Peacock Hill are included in an area where it would not be through like a one-off annexation, but more of a protracted negotiation with Pierce County. So if it's the case where that's not necessarily something that would happen in the short term or envisioned to happen in the short term, but it may be something that happens over a longer period of time, especially as other areas are annexed, it's not unreasonable to include it in a long-term management area where, in 7 to 10 years, the issue is revisited. So this is more to make sure that there's consistency with the way that everyone is thinking about how to annex certain areas.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mayor. I was also just going to add on to that, it also kind of comes back to this idea of prioritizing and sort of giving ourselves a plan over time. Now this plan can change. I mean, this document can be revisited and we can make changes to it, 5, 10, 15 years down the road as conditions change and economics change. But this is, again, just kind of looking at it from what we know now and what makes sense.
Great. Councilmember Rodenberg.
Yes, on both of those maps, there appears to be 2 blocks that say Peacock Hill. The lower one looks like it's City Park, and specifically probably just that Masonic Lodge area that we pretty much have decided we're going to annex in order to make it part of the park. So did you just put those titles on there for simplification, or because they're going to be done at the same time, or what was the thinking there?
So in terms of the labeling, that's just to make sure that we know where everything is and know that that's not a separate area. The reason why it's colored blue is for exactly the reason that you state. I mean, there's smaller areas where it's just a lot easier for the city to take the lead in an annexation process rather than to hold back and wait until residents are interested in pursuing a petition to be annexed into the city.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. Yeah, this is critical. I understand that the map doesn't bind us to anything. Clearly, it looks like there are priorities set. I guess the only thing is if we were to move ahead with removing Madrona Links out of the UGA, that is a formal thing that we would do that would somewhat bind us to that. I want to go back to what Mary was talking about and the Madrona Links, and whether if we release it, take it out of our UGA, whether that property then becomes more valuable or less valuable for somebody to say, goodness, I can sell it for a lot more than it's worth as a golf course, and I want to put in auto dealerships there. And this same argument went along with the McCormick Forest Park, saying, hey, take it out of our UGA because it'll be worth more out of the UGA than in the UGA or in the city limits, and thus PennMet would never sell it. And I'm trying to wrap my head around that. It's still a little bit, actually doesn't make sense to me, but I think we, the council, need to know if we take something out of the UGA, what are the ramifications, especially what I would call a developable area like Madrona Links. It is a golf course, and like Mary said, many of those have folded over the years, and that's a big area that could be easily transformed into something. And I would hate to see it being transformed into auto dealerships. But if we keep it in the UGA, for instance, and we were to annex it, we, the city, might have more control over what went in there based on how we elected to zone it. We could either zone it commercial auto dealerships, or we could zone it parkland. I don't know if there's not a parkland zoning, I guess, but something like that. So I think we need to discuss that before we can say we should put it in there and then take it out, because all these other priorities don't bind us to anything. If 3 weeks from now, everybody says, let's annex Canterwood, and everybody says, great, well, we're going to ignore this map. But if you take something out of the UGA, that's a formal, my assumption is that's a formal move on the part of the city that would be not difficult, but would take more time to undo if we did it. Does that make any sense?
It does make sense, Councilmember Henderson, and you're right. It is, if it's removed, the likelihood of getting it back is pretty much null. You know, definitely in the near term. Now, maybe down the road as things change, maybe we could get it back into the UGA, but I don't think that is something that happens very easily.
Right.
And so I would also say that because we are saying that these are areas to be removed, that doesn't necessarily mean that council must take action on removing those areas as soon as this report is adopted. This is,
okay.
Again, this is a policy document for use in future decision-making and to inform our comprehensive plan and our upcoming comprehensive plan update, but certainly not something that we have to take any kind of action on.
Andrew, did you want to add on to that?
Oh, I just wanted to make a quick note, Carl. I beg the council's forgiveness. I am double booked for a meeting, and I do need to leave the call for a little while at 3 o'clock. I know that there is another slide that you wanted me to kind of address. I don't want to derail any discussions or anything, but I know that there was a question that you might have wanted me to talk to. And by all means, like I'm in communication with Carl, and I can certainly receive your comments if there are any questions about how we did the report as well. But did you want?
Councilmember Book and Jensen, could your questions wait until the next couple slides, or were they specifically for Andrew?
I just wanted to remind the people that when we took the East Gig Harbor out of the UGA, it went to 1 house per 5 acres.
Yeah, I was going to have Carl detail out, and Carl can do this, what the zoning is if you're in the UGA, what it is in the city, or what it could be, and then what it is when it's out of the UGA, just like Jenny said, so people understand. It's a little counterintuitive, so it is confusing.
Okay, Mayor, if it's okay, I think we could come back to that question and certainly talk about that. If we could just move to the next slide and let Andrew talk about that, and then we can we'll circle back if that's okay.
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
And
Okay,
apologies, apologies for that. I'll look to reconnect with Carl and can answer your questions by email. Oh, I might
No
need
worries
that
at all.
back. No.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that was asked at the last study session meeting was looking at the sales tax revenue that would come from residents, given that we're looking more towards online sales now. And because the Department of Revenue has a destination-based tax where if you're ordering something on Amazon, for example, you're taxed in Gig Harbor. You're not taxed in Kent or Seattle or anything else. I will say two things about this at a high level. For one, I will admit upfront that while this is emerging as a trend, it's not something that we've studied as part of annexation studies in the past. This is something that's emerging, and I think that because of the pandemic and more people ordering things online, that it's become more in the forefront for people. Another thing to note is that the sales tax revenue information that's available from the Department of Revenue with the state, they do track it, and they track it across different industries and industry groups. There's a lot of detail, but they don't split up the source. There isn't information on whether the seller is from the community or outside, or whether the buyer is from the community or outside. That does complicate our ability to do an analysis like that. However, one of the things that we do separate analyses on the basis of taxable retail sales to give cities an understanding of where their revenue is coming from. So in taking a look at that, I did do a quick analysis of looking at where the big sources of tax revenue were in Gig Harbor, and looking at per capita estimates that we would typically make for Gig Harbor, what would be kind of the draw from new annexation areas. So first of all, obviously the big sources of sales tax revenue, it would be, the big box stores we have located in the southern portion of the city. That is a big driver. And the general merchandise stores and building material and garden equipment and supplies dealers, those are different classifications that the Department of Revenue has for that. It's very significant. In doing kind of a test case, in determining what would be the effect of diverting 15 to 20% of a household's retail spending to online sales. When we're looking, because a lot of the areas are dominated by residential development, there is a population that is there right now that would be expected to be there if the areas were built out. But in calculating it and comparing it to property taxes in those areas, it comes out to be about 2 to 3% in pretty much all of the residential areas, 2 to 3% of what the revenue from property taxes would be. So unless there's a pretty massive shift, and it could happen in the future, but unless there's a pretty massive shift in spending habits and where people are getting certain things, and that's a range from like ordering, like that would include things like ordering your car online, or making a lot of bulk purchases or regular purchases that wouldn't necessarily be something that we would be buying online. But unless there's a much more significant shift, it's not really going to be as significant of a factor to change the conclusions we have in the report. One other thing to note on the side is that if we were to go down this road, we'd probably also want to just give some consideration to the fact that this could happen in reverse as well, where the big box stores that are located in Gig Harbor could have a declining customer base because people would want to be, or at the very least would be shifting some of their sales to online sales that wouldn't be deriving sales tax revenue for Gig Harbor. So it's very complicated in that, we had to sit down and think about how to answer this question for a little while. But I think that we can certainly try to drill down further, but I don't think that this is going to have a significant enough effect to change the conclusions that we have reached.
So in other words, I think the recommendation then, Andrew, is that we would not include this data in the report as currently written.
Yeah, I think if there's still concern about it, that we can make a note of it. But I think that it's a small part of a much more complex issue when it comes to city finances.
Okay. All right, doesn't appear that there are any questions about that. So I think we will circle back, if that's okay, Mayor, to the last question. Thank you, Andrew. And I think the question then is what currently Madrona Links is in our urban growth area, And we do have it designated on our comprehensive plan as residential low, as we do with most of our urban growth area, with the exception of Purdy, where we do have some commercial and employment center. And so if this were annexed, it would come into the city under R1 zoning. Now, I don't know, the other question I think is what is the zone, how is it zoned in the county currently? And I don't have that off the top. I would have to look that up. I could find it probably relatively quickly. But I don't know exactly, and because it's owned by Penn Met, there's a good possibility that it is in a parks and open space zoning designation. They had recently gone through several properties and rezoned several Penn Met properties to a parks and open space designation. So that's my guess, is that this might be in that the same boat, except that it does have the residential development there, so that it's possible that it's different. So I'd have to look that up, and I certainly could do so before bringing this back to council at a council meeting to review for adoption by resolution, if it's something that council is interested in understanding more about. Andrew?
Well, one more quick note here is that there is a breakdown for area in each UGA that's in each type of Pierce County zone on page 26. So that just breaks down like what it currently is. So that may be a useful reference in thinking about it. But yeah, it's most of the areas are R1 if they come into the city. So.
I think the other half of that analysis is, here's what the currently allowed zoning in Pierce County is, but what would be the allowed uses and densities under the city's zoning that we have proposed for that area? I think that's to the heart of Councilmember Denson's question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which at this point is residential low, so it'd come in as R1, which would be residential uses primarily.
What's the density for R1?
Carl, what does that mean? What does R1 mean? How many homes per?
Four dwelling units per acre.
And what's the county designation for some of these areas as a comparison?
Okay, so that's what I'm looking at here, actually. Thanks, Andrew, for reminding me that that's in here. And so under Pierce County zoning, most of Madrona Links is in Parks and Recreation, and a portion of it to the north, just kind of to the north section of the property is in single family. And then they have the little development in the southeast, which is also single family.
And what's the density allowed in their single family zone? Same as ours?
No, it would not be the same as ours. I have to look that up.
More dense or less dense in general?
Would be less dense.
Okay.
Matthew?
Matthew?
Question, Matt?
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate the conversation. I think it got addressed already, though.
Okay.
Okay.
Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you. So on the density though, even though it may come in, let's say we were to annex it, the city could change the zoning, right? I mean, just because it would come in as that doesn't mean it's fixed like that forever.
No, typically what happens is when you annex an area, you designate what the zoning is going to be for all the parcels in the annexation area. Sometimes people or cities annex an area before designating the zoning, but usually you do it before, so the people who would be voting on it know what it's going to be.
Okay, so it would still be possible to zone that whatever we wanted prior to annexing it, right? Whether
Correct.
it would just, I'm just trying to get the fact that it's not cast in concrete that it's whatever the city wants it to be before we annex it.
Correct.
That's correct, Councilman Henderson. And in order to change that, we would have to amend our comp plan.
Councilmember Barber?
I guess based on this discussion and what it's my understanding from what Carl said that this recommendation is doing is it's a recommendation that will be policy for the future. I'm not comfortable with us removing either of the parcels from the UGA that we last time we had this discussion that we recommended removing. I guess I feel like we've gotten enough more information today that it sounds like if we remove them, it has the potential to cause us more problems in the future, depending on what happened. And we have, shall we say, more control over our destiny if we leave them in, even if we leave them in as long-term management areas, rather than remove them from the UGA.
Are there two other than, another one other than Madrona Links that's being removed?
Madrona Links and the one, Bujajij, McCormick, it's a park.
McCormick Creek Forest Park, yeah,
Yeah.
near the next to the
I got it. I see
state
it.
prison.
So I'd rather leave both of those in.
So Carl, do you need direction, specific direction from council, a majority of who wants to leave those in and who does not?
Mayor, it would be helpful if we had direction on that, because then we could bring back a succinct report to council at council meeting for them for review and adoption by resolution.
Because we thought our direction from our last meeting was to remove those two items. So if you want them back in, I want to make sure the majority of council wants to do that.
I think there's still some confusion. I think the way I understand it, we have more control if a property is annexed in the city than we do if it is in our UGA. However, if we exclude these properties from the UGA, if they are not in our UGA anymore, then Carl, isn't it true that the zoning is 1 home per 5 acres? Whereas in the UGA or anything the city does, it's going to be probably 4 homes per acre. So it's going to be more dense. It'll be less dense if it's out of the UGA, just like we did in East Gig Harbor to preserve that hillside.
That's correct, Councilmember Denson. That's exactly right. Well put. Thank you.
Okay, so based on everything that you all understand now, show of hands, actual hands, who would like to keep these 2 areas in the UGA or in this on the map?
That's
Okay,
pretty
who
clear
would like
direction.
who would like to remove these 2 areas from the UGA? Okay, so 2 council want to remove and nobody wants to keep them. Maybe I didn't
I
phrase
don't
that
understand what you
correctly.
mean by keep them.
So the question on the table from Carl is, are you wanting to leave Madrona Links and Busich and Canterwood, leave these in up
Not
for
Canterwood.
annexation?
No.
Not Canterwood.
I'm sorry, not Canterwood. Busich, McCormick Creek Park, by the women's prison, right?
Correct.
That and Madrona Links. Do you want those left on the map to be considered for annexation? Or do you want them removed? So that's the question on the table. So who wants those properties left in to be considered for annexation?
May I ask another clarifying question before we vote? Getting back to Robin's statement and also confirmed by Carl, if a property is taken out of our UGA, it is then under a less dense zoning. My question is, could the county, just like the city, if we had something in our UGA, rezone their property by annexing their comp plan to turn Madrona Links into a auto sales parking lot? Because again, it's about who has control over what. We may agree that, oh yeah, we'll take it out of our UGA, and currently the county has it, very less dense. Everybody seems to be happy about that. But in fact, could the county, if it was economically desirable for them, change the zoning to make it into I hate to harp on auto sales, but those are probably some of the ugliest things you can build. If that's the case, then I don't really want it out of the UGA, because then it's completely out of our hands. That's my understanding. So I'm looking down the road a long way thinking what we give up also control. And if we're basing our decision on the fact that currently those areas would be zoned out of our control, something that everybody would like, you know, one house per 1,000 acres. But then in a month or 2 months or something, the county says, well, it's worth more to us as an auto sales lot. We're going to change the zoning to commercial. Then what are we going to do?
Carl?
It's a great point, Councilmember Anderson, and I think you're exactly right. That is something that could potentially happen. I mean, of course, county would have to show their work, you know, why they're upzoning property, of course, and it'd have to meet concurrency standards and have to meet the countywide planning policies, of course. But it's certainly something that could happen. Absolutely. I think it's a very good point.
Right. I just want to make sure that people, if we vote on taking those out, they understand what the potential is down the road, that it's completely out of our control, and it will be whatever the county wants it to be. I mean, that I want to get out there so that everybody says, oh, no, it's great, let's take it out. I'm concerned about that.
Councilmember Wook.
Thank you. Let's remember that we have the Growth Management Act, and this property, if it gets taken out, gets put in rural and it gets saved. And the purpose of this is to keep it in rural according to the Growth Management Act. And it's just not something that Pierce County has the ability to do on their own, I do not believe. And we should get this checked really well, because I don't think that Pierce County can just do something that is against the Growth Management Act, which is set by the state.
And that's a good point, Councilmember Wilk, and that's kind of what I was saying, is that the county, in order to upzone that area, they would have to show their work. They would have to show that they are doing something that is consistent with the act, consistent with countywide planning policies, consistent with Vision 2050. So it isn't something that they could just wave a magic wand and do tomorrow. But that's not to say that it could not be done.
Exactly, and that's the point I'm getting at. Is it possible? Yes, we could discuss the probability of it, and that's, I mean, would they have to show their work? Of course, but if that were the case,
Are we doing a round robin, or are we calling on people for comments? I think
sorry,
Councilmember Denson was next.
Okay, point well taken. Councilmember Denson.
Well, this has been a really good discussion. And I'm shifting my opinion on this a little bit based on some of Roger's comments and some of the other comments as well. I'm wondering if, and I'll remind council too, that what happens here with this map still has to go before council for a vote. So we can change it, we can do it, we can not do it, it's up to us. So I'm wondering if maybe a compromise is to put Madrona and the Busich area into the longest term, like with Canterwood and Reed Road, kind of the lowest level. Because I will just say, and you know how much I want to conserve land, we might, once we do this housing inventory report, at some point, we may need some property where we can put housing, and the Madrona Links property is already cleared. That might make the most sense along Highway 16. Not that I'm promoting it, but maybe it would be good to have in our pocket, whereas the Busich property is heavily forested. And I mean, these are just discussions we can have down the road, but yeah, my opinion is kind of shifting. So maybe I would suggest we put it in that same category as Reed and Canterwood, whichever one that was.
Councilmember Likens.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So just to clarify, in the original recommendations, if I'm remembering correctly, was from the Planning Commission and in the report was to remove the Busich property, but to keep the golf course. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councilmember Likens.
Okay.
And not to remove it, but just to put it in, to categorize it as an area to be considered for removal.
Okay.
The McCormick Forest Park area.
Okay. So, and okay. So that was your professional recommendation. Do you still stand by that recommendation as the best option?
I think keeping these areas within our urban growth area is not harmful to the city. It's not harmful to our long-term outlook. And in fact, gives us more options probably down the road. And I think it's something that, you know, like I've said before, this document can be amended later, you know, if council chooses to take another look and make different policy choices. So I think, you know, putting them in the long-term management area or leaving them in an area to be removed, to be honest, I don't know if it makes that much difference at this point.
Okay.
While at the same time, it is a document that council is adopting, and I think you should definitely make, you know, I think council would be best served to put their, you know, best foot forward at this time. But I think if we go one way or the other, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in the overall analysis of the overall document.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. Although it may not mean, well, it may not affect the city if we just leave it like this with the areas to be taken out. It might send a message to others that I'm not sure we should be sending. So I actually like Robin's idea of keeping all of them in the long-term management. It gives us more options later on. And it sends a message. It doesn't send quite the powerful message that, yeah, we're going to let the forest go and the Madrona links go and take it out at some point. So I kind of like putting it back into the gray area. It gives us options. If we, at some point we want to say, no, we don't need it anymore, we don't want it, we can take it out.
Okay, so Carl, what is your final standing request from council?
Well, it sounds like council is leaning towards placing these two properties in the long-term management area, and then we would just be removing the areas to be removed altogether from the map at this point. And staff would be happy to move that forward, absolutely, and bring it back as such.
So show of hands, is that where council is leaning? Yes, okay.
Mhm.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
thank you.
And so I guess then just kind of finishing up here, overall, council members, I guess I just want to get concurrence from the council that you're comfortable with the prioritized strategies as we've presented them today, and also that you're comfortable with the changes to the strategic areas map. I think we've just done that. And then lastly, whether or not we were going to continue to refine the sewer fee section or leave it as is. So I think still just kind of two questions there. The priorities, and I think from what I gathered, everyone is comfortable with that. So then the last question, I think, is just on the sewer fee section. Should we just leave it the way it was presented this evening, or sorry, today, and bring that back for your consideration at a council meeting upcoming?
So show of hands. Is comfortable with the way that this was presented today?
Can I have a question?
Councilmember Wook.
Thank you. So we're going to be looking at sewer fees, I believe, coming up with Jeff. How does this differ from the sewer issues that we're going to be talking about with Jeff, utility fees? Carl.
Oh, I was sorry, Councilman Rook. I was going to let Jeff answer that question because I'm not as familiar with what he's going to be presenting coming up.
Okay.
Well, what we're going to look at for the sewer utility fees is strictly how much we are expected to expend both in capital expenses and daily operating expenses for the next 6 years, and how much revenue we need to generate in order to cover those expenses.
So this doesn't have anything to do with what you're going to be looking at.
I mean, we're going to have data that identifies in revenues that are gathered in the UGA, but it's, as we discussed earlier, it's something that we can come back and address as we slowly incorporate these areas, since we're not doing it all at one time.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other clarifying questions from council before we answer Carl's final question? Councilmember Henderson?
Quick one. Carl, we didn't discuss too much about the city-led annexations, the little blue areas. What was the timeline on those, since they're city-led?
Well, that would be, we termed them short term, so priority, first priority, and in the short term. So, council could sort of define that, I suppose, for themselves when down the road, or when we get into updating our comp plan, I think is where we would probably add some better definition around that. But the short term, I would say, would be anytime from, excuse me, anytime from, now to 3 or 5 years.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, so Carl, would you like to ask your question again for a show of hands from council?
Certainly, Mayor. Just looking for concurrence that council is comfortable with the prioritized strategies and comfortable with the changes to this the strategy map with, of course, with the tweaks that we just discussed, and comfortable with the sewer fee section that we added into the report.
Seeing thumbs, hands, nods, yes. Okay,
Great.
looks good.
Thank you so much. I hope my presentation wasn't too painful.
No, very good presentation as always, Carl. Thank you very much.
We were hoping our questions weren't too painful for you either, Carl. Thank you.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Our second discussion item is our stormwater source control program, and this is our engineering tech, Bree Ellis.
Can we take a quick break before that?
We
Please?
absolutely can.
Sorry.
Let's take a 5-minute break. So 3:21. Welcome back to the Gig Harbor City Council study session of Thursday, April 14th. The time is 3:23 p.m. And we are moving on to our second item of business for discussion, which is our stormwater source control program.
And certainly the most eagerly anticipated one.
Yes, because hello, Michael. Bree Ellis, our engineering tech, ready to present.
We love your presentations, Bree.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for having me this afternoon. Let me share my screen. Okay, so today I'm going to share with you a stormwater source control program, and we will just go through what we need to do for this. An overview, we're going to talk about what a source control program is, what a BMP is. I know a few of you probably know what a BMP is, but I use that acronym a lot, so I want to make sure we understand what that is. Our ordinance adoption, proposed code language, business inventory, enforcement policy, and next steps. So first off, what is a source control program? This is a requirement that is within our stormwater municipal permit. It includes adopting an ordinance, establishing a business inventory, creating an inspection program, creating enforcement policy, and staff training. So we want to stay in compliance with our ecology permit. And to do so, we need to have some sort of ordinance that requires our local businesses to implement BMPs to prevent pollution. Oops, sorry. So what is a BMP? BMP stands for Best Management Practice, and this is just a series of actions that reduces stormwater pollution. So for source control, there's a couple different BMPs. There's either operational or structural. So operational would be things like my business is not going to dump oil down a catch basin. Structural would be things like I'm going to cover my dumpsters or install some sort of secondary containment. All businesses will be required to meet BMPs that are outlined in our stormwater manual. And in the manual, it talks about required and suggested BMPs. We will be enforcing on required BMPs. The suggested ones may be things like changing your chemicals to more green chemical, things like that. These BMPs are examples that you might see at an auto business. So the first step in this process is ordinance adoption. By August 1st of this year, we need to make adoption or code change that talks about source control. I've listed some proposed language. I took this from Kitsap County. All phase 2 municipal permittees are going through this same thing. So Kitsap was nice enough to share kind of what they're thinking. This is just a draft. It can be changed, but kind of a starting point. I think that the plan would be to put this language into chapter 14.20, which is the stormwater management portion of our code. So business inventory is also a step in this. So we need to create an inventory or list of all of the businesses within the city of Gig Harbor that are potential pollution generators. So examples may be mobile businesses like landscaping, or there's quite a few mobile auto detail businesses in town, auto repair, restaurants, gas stations, grocery, and then specific to Gig Harbor, we need to focus on marina and boat repair businesses as well. So our permit requires us to inspect 20% of the inventory, the list that we come up with. I finished the inventory. We have 580 businesses within the city. So 20% of that would be 116 per year, or about two a week. Yes, Jeff.
So I just wanted to point out to council and ask you a question. So also the city of Gig Harbor is included in businesses. I mean, Bree not only looks at all businesses that are commercial entities, but she looks at our treatment plant, our operations center. So we're not excluded from this. But my question, I guess, is, do you know if the city of Gig Harbor is going to be one of those businesses that's inspected as this 20% of inventory each year?
Yes. So yeah, like our shop, for example, they do not get to sneak away from me.
Exactly. Yep.
So just to note, I don't know if that seems like a lot. It seems like a lot to do to me, but that's just the initial inspection. Right? If you go to a business once, the follow-up is what I have learned is taking a lot of time. Just from my experience, going to businesses that have maybe some illicit discharge problems or pollution problems, it's the follow-up that is really time consuming. So the technical assistance, holding hands with them and trying to get them in compliance. Another part of this is enforcement. So we will use our new code adoption to kind of start this process. And I think it's really important to note that we should start with education and technical assistance with these businesses. A lot of businesses are just not aware of their pollution that they're generating, or even what stormwater is. So a lot of education, hand-holding out the gate, in my opinion, is what would be best. Followed up by warning letter, notice of violation, and any sort of penalty. We plan to work with code enforcement a lot on developing this policy and then also implementing it. So today, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction on what this is, and then maybe in July, do a first and second reading of the ordinance. I'd also like to plan for some public outreach to these businesses, just so they know what's coming. And then our drop dead dates that we need to meet are August 1st, the ordinance has to be adopted. Also the business inventory needs to be complete. That's already done. And then starting the 1st of next year, our source control inspections need to begin. So quick walkthrough, but I'll take any questions or comments.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Brianna. Appreciate it. I indeed like what you're doing. I got a couple questions for you. One is, are you the only one doing inspections and follow-up? Do you need more staff? I mean, even 116 facilities a year, that's that's a lot because you can't get to everyone every time, so you're gonna have to reschedule. So that's almost a full-time job just doing the initial inspections, not to talk about any follow-up on that. The second question I have is, in your proposed ordinance language, we're talking about should operational source control fail to prevent illicit discharges or allow violation of surface or groundwater or sediment, then you go into your processes that you have to get them to do their BMPs. I'm assuming we are not doing any stormwater monitoring, as in sampling and analysis. I'm pretty certain we're not doing any groundwater monitoring and analysis. Other than maybe seeing something going down a drain, how do you know when there's been an illicit discharge?
Okay, so the first question, yes, I am the only one doing this with help from Adam Blodgett as needed for code enforcement. I usually do initial inspection, follow up, and then if it needs enforcement, Adam is very helpful with that. I agree, someone to do this would be great. I don't think that I have the capacity to do it all myself. Secondly, stormwater analysis, we are not doing any water sampling at this time. It depends on the situation. There was a business that was doing some illicit dumping, and we had them do a cleanup. And within that cleanup, we had them do soil sampling and water sampling just to make sure that the cleanup was complete. So I think it just depends on the individual circumstance as far as sampling goes. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we don't know about it unless you physically see it or somebody calls you up and says, hey, somebody was dumping motor oil down the drain. I mean, we don't have any monitoring in place that would alert us if something was going on, just other than just visual, right?
That's correct. And then as far, smaller spills, oil spills on the road, our public works team is great about responding and cleaning that up. So.
Councilmember Wook?
Yes, thank you. To sort of follow up on Roger's questions, is our goal to have pure water going into the bay and the Puget Sound? Is that our goal?
I mean, I think that's always the goal, right? Cleaner water quality. I think this will aid in that. I think as soon as we start looking for problems, we're going to find a lot of them. Just the few businesses that I've been to, yeah, they need some help and some education.
If we're not testing what's going into the bay, how do we know what's going into the bay?
That's also a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know if like a baseline would be appropriate. Stormwater is the #1 urban pollution at this time. Studies have been shown that. Hopefully this source control program will reduce that, but I don't know of any numbers that I can give you.
So how do we get those numbers? Maybe we need to do a baseline study. How do we go forward with that?
I'm not sure. Jeff, do you have?
Well, yeah, if there's interest in doing baseline studies for certain breaches or culvert sections, I think that that's something we could consider through the budget process to obtain numbers on how much that would cost. I also think it'd be good to reach out to other jurisdictions and hear what they're doing about this too, instead of us leading the way.
So Jeff, don't others larger cities have to test?
Can I interject? It just depends. A TMDL is kind of a water quality issue that ecology submits. If you have a TMDL on a specific water body, then you have to do additional testing. We do not have a TMDL within the city of Gig Harbor at this time.
TMDL is total maximum daily limit. So ecology establishes the maximum amount of any certain pollutant you can add to a water body, water of the state. So that's why those jurisdictions that have a TMDL established have to monitor for it.
And a lot of times those TMDLs are for fecal, just an FYI.
Councilmember Rodenberg?
Yeah, the Department of Ecology has a complaint-based enforcement. So if they in fact are working with a business, then who trumps who? Do you let them do their thing, or are you going to get involved with what they're already doing?
We try and work together as a team. That Ecology has an ERT system. It's environmental reporting tracking system, I think. And anyone can call the ERTs. And then if Ecology gets an ERTs for City of Gig Harbor, that comes to me. So I'm alerted and can respond. Like if there is a big spill in the bay, Ecology would likely respond to that as well and assist. So we try to work together.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Bree or Jeff? Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just that I recognize that Bree has had more and more added to her plate as these additional requirements from the stormwater permit come on board. And definitely between Bree and Trent and I, we're going to be having discussion on staffing levels, and you'll probably see something in the 2023-24 biennial budget.
Great.
And then any feedback on ordinance, I think I'm just going to draft one and we'll present it to council. But if you have any other feedback on that, I'll take it.
Councilmember Henderson?
No, I mean, the only feedback I had again is kind of what a couple of us, Jenny Wook and I brought up about monitoring, that if you don't know what's going into your stormwater system, you don't really know unless you see it, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. So it might be a discussion we can have at a later study of council. I'm aware though that coming up with a monitoring plan, you know, like Jeff said, we go on our own or looking at whatever anybody else has done, would require a lot of time and effort on your part. That's the issue that I see. I mean, it's necessary. I think I'd like to see it. It's just a matter of resourcing it, and that's going to be a challenge right now, because just starting this by itself without any monitoring is going to be plenty. So I don't want to drop it just because we don't have staff, but I think it's something we need to keep kind of up front and start looking at. Just because we don't have a TMDL, actually somewhat a good thing we don't, because generally if you get a TMDL, it means you did something really, really bad and they got to monitor it for a long time. I don't mind getting ahead of the game and saying, yeah, we don't have that much going in, or, oh my gosh, we have more than we think, and we can start to do something about it. I've never been an advocate of not looking for issues when you think there might be, because it gets worse over time. It doesn't get any better.
Great, thanks for the feedback. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bree, for your
Thank you, Bree.
presentation.
Good job.
Thank you, Jeff, also for your input. We will move on to item number 3, our 2022 active CIP schedule update, and that will be our Public Works Director, Jeff Langman.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, as you saw in the packet that was distributed, I added a part of to the CIP active project schedule, the actual public outreach matrix document, to try and merge those two documents a little closer together. We don't have an ideal way of looking at the schedule and the details together. So I think that hopefully side by side, at least you can take a look and see where they are. I was going to show on my screen today the schedule and share that with you, and then go through and update you as we go on the public outreach document and the matrix itself. So happy to hear more input, ways to receive the information better, more clearly, but I'll just keep refining as we go. So I'll share my screen now. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the schedule. Okay. So on this one, unless I have something in particular, I was just going to skip over things like Scansy Net Shed. You see where it is. We don't have any changes. The changes are identified in the schedule by the items being highlighted. So I'll focus on those that are highlighted, or if there's specific items that I want to point out in the details of the project itself. So if I skip some and you want to hear something about it, raise your hand, feel free. I'll happy to go back and update you or talk about the schedule or talk about any outreach that we are doing. So I'm going to jump down to the anti human powered watercraft storage racks. Right now, the racks were delivered actually last Friday. The crew assembled those on Monday and Tuesday. If you were to go down to the Antage Boat Storage Building, you'll see the racks are installed. We're finalizing the layout to try and look at who submitted applications and who won the lottery to see how we best can lay out those racks. That's something our operations and Shelby, one of our engineering techs, is working on. We are getting close to finalizing that. We're also on a parallel track, notifying everybody who won the lottery and trying to get that coordinated. We are looking at a May 1st date to make sure that everybody's in the boat storage building by then. There's going to be an orientation for everybody who's going to be involved in storing their racks so that they're very clear on what the rules are. Matt is working with Scott Keeley on that, and those people who have been notified will be hear more about that orientation soon. Next, the Austin Honoring Art project. So that one's highlighted on the schedule because it was delayed a little bit. We didn't get out to bid as early as we'd hoped, but we do have the building permit now. We were out to bid. We're getting ready to open bids on April 21st, so next week. What you see out there today, if you've been out and past the site, you'll see a bunch of concrete blocks out there. Those concrete blocks are specifically placed in the area where the concrete foundation will be placed. Because of requirements from Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, we are not allowed to dig down into the soil. Instead, the foundation for the artwork has to be placed on the surface. Because of that, we need to preload way down the surface to compact the surface itself. And so what you see out there is just a bunch of ecology blocks doing a preload on it. Those ecology blocks need to be there for at least a month. We're going to probably keep them there until the contractor is ready to move on site. But we do hope to be to council with a contract for award at the first council meeting in May. And then we will, after award, we'll coordinate with the contractor and we'll get the city operations crew will get those ecology blocks out of there and we'll be proceeding. Okay. Let's see, Community Paddlers Dock was taken off of this because it's no longer an active project since we've received a certificate of occupancy. But I did want to give everyone a heads up. There's a little more work we're going to be doing at that site. Some of you might have heard this, and maybe I mentioned it last time, but we're going to be putting a aluminum security fence in between Community Paddlers Dock and Lucas Landing, which is the marina immediately to the east, because they're so close together. We're still working on that. Hopefully we'll get a fabrication. We received a cost from the contractor. Their bid was fairly high because of their means and methods and mobilization. And so we think we can do it at a lesser rate, but we're working on that right now. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Jeff. Was there going to be some lighting that was going to be added as well? Or is that already in?
That's already in, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there should be no additional lighting needed. The bollards are there. There's lighting in the handrails. If you haven't been down there at dark, the handrail has lighting. We did change how that lighting on the Community Paddlers Dock receives its electricity. But I mean, if you want to go into that, I can tell you what that difference that was. Okay, I'm going to skip forward now.
Councilmember Wood has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Wood.
Yes. Oops. Yeah. Yes. The Civic Center electric vehicle charging station. Is it possible to have that use a solar panel to charge those charging stations?
Not directly. No, those charging stations are going to be 3-phase power. You'd have to have a solar array that was as large as the city hall at least to be able to charge one of those charging stations. But that said, we have continued to look for grants to put solar panels on top of the Civic Center. We had looked at a grant years ago to put solar panels on the Civic Center, but we still had to re-roof the building. So we wanted to get the building re-roofed, which we did in, I think, in 2019, was it, or 2018?
It was 18 because I was here. I remember watching the workers.
I remember hearing them above your office. Yes.
Yep.
And so it was re-roofed. So now, and it's a 50-year roof. So now is the time to continue to look for grants for solar panels to be installed. And so I do have a connection with the Department of Commerce for those types of grants. I need to follow up with those when I have a moment.
And how about the Public Works building, since it's not built yet? Is it going to be able to have solar panels on it?
It is not part of the contract, but it would be possible to have it. The roof line of that would allow to have solar panels along a long, broad roof plane that is facing west. So that would be an option. We could look at that as possibly part of the grant application to put solar panels on both City Hall and at the Public Works Operations Center.
So do I understand that really if you want to optimize solar panels, they need to face south?
South or west, south and or west, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to jump down to.
Before you do, I just want to point out Bogue Visitor Center building. That's the roof and the HVAC system that we had committed to do as part of the lease, the new lease with the chamber.
Yes, and there is an update in your packet about the Bogue Visitor Center. Oh no, it's going to be put in here next. Sorry, that's one of them we're going to be adding. But yeah, so we have a consultant under contract now, and we're starting with that right now. In fact, I just had a conversation with Paul Rice about that yesterday. So proceeding. City street projects, again, Operations Center is here, but it spans many funds. We are working, we had a few comments on the building permit that we submitted. Our consultant is working on those now to have those addressed and get out to bid. I don't know if we're going to be out to bid in time to open bids and award it at the May 9th council meeting. I'll wait to see where we end up next week, but we're getting close. Okay, Rosedale Stinson. So this one remains on our project list because of streetlight poles. And we've probably told you that we're getting close to, and you've probably seen some of the streetlight poles and equipment out there. We ran into a bit of a hiccup. When the contractor came out to install those streetlight poles, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, they went to stand them up and they realized that they weren't the right poles. So we've been waiting all this time and they ordered the wrong poles. But what it comes down to, and there's a lot of finger pointing going on right now, and we're going to be working through that. Since we have a federal grant for this project, there is a requirement in all federal grants that we have a Buy America clause for steel. The typical streetlight pole that we purchase is made in Canada. And so the manufacturer, or the supplier, I should say, thought that they had an equivalent pole, an equivalent decorative system. That's really the difference, is that you look at any of our streetlight poles, we have a very detailed and distinct decorative base at the bottom of that. And the ones that they supplied didn't meet that. They will bolt up to the foundation, but it doesn't meet the decorative base. So we are working with the contractor now to look at options. We ideally don't want to have multiple bases, because if one pole falls down or a base gets hit, we like to have the same style in our inventory so we don't have to keep stock of many different styles. But we're going to look at options at staff level, and we're going to talk to the vendor to see what other options they can provide. But right now, unfortunately, this project is lingering on. Any questions on that?
Geez, that is so unfortunate, Jeff.
Yes, it is.
This project has been in this state since I got here in July. We've been waiting for all this stuff since July.
Yep. Yeah, it has been. And Trent told me today that even our grantor, Transportation Improvement Board, really wants us to close this project out. So we need to get this done. Yep. Okay. I'm going to jump down to Burnham Drive improvements phase 1A. I had a question on this one earlier today, and I just wanted to point out that when we were going through the 60% design, well, 30% into 60% design, the consultants realized that because of stormwater requirements and because of sight line requirements, street trees that were originally shown the planter strip between the road edge and the sidewalk could not be installed as originally anticipated. In other words, in conformance with our public works standards. For the current design that we have that's at 90%, the consultant has removed all street trees in the planter strip in between the sidewalk and the back of the, or the edge of roadway. That's because again, sight distance, but also that planter strip is no longer a true planter strip. It is a swale, drainage swale, and is used for treatment of stormwater. And you can't plant trees in there because you need to be able to let the stormwater essentially go through the swale. But there are options that we're looking at. And oh, by the way, we are planting trees on the backside of walks. So it's not like we're planting no trees. The trees are being planted in a different location. But we are, I've talked to Marcos, project manager on this one, and we are looking to find ways to plant some street trees in that planter area. There's a couple options, but we need to iron those out. So more to come on that. Any questions on that one?
Sorry.
Councilmember Henderson.
Go ahead.
Jeff, are you at 90% design right now with that?
Well, yes, we just received 90% design plans.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay. Just a comment, 38th Avenue Phase 2, that one, we are getting ready to get some survey completed on that one. And so this one will likely be added to the public outreach matrix soon because you'll start to see surveyors out there. Councilmember Denson.
Thank you, Jeff. So we've completed phase 1 on 38th Street.
Yes, in fact, I think we took it off the list because we were done with that one.
So we're ready to start phase 2. I drove over there the other day and it looks amazing. And I'm wondering, aren't we doing something for Prentice? Maybe we should do some sort of community ribbon cutting thing. Are we planning anything for 38th Street? Because people have been waiting for this forever.
We haven't. We talked about that. There was because the county hasn't completed their section from the school, we feel like it's not fully completed, but the city's portion is. But we have not scheduled a ribbon cutting for it. If there's interest, we can.
Well, just a thought. If you guys have been discussing it, that's fine, but at least we should highlight it, I think, or let people know, because if you don't drive over there all the time, I hadn't been over there in forever, and I specifically went to see because I didn't know. I was like, oh my gosh, look, it looks great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to jump down to the water projects. The Reed Drive 55th Street Court water main improvements. That's an in-house design. That design has begun. The survey has been completed. They need to do a little bit more survey work, go capture a couple more things, but in-house design of that has begun. And we hope to start advertising for bids for this project in June or July of 2022. So it's coming up quick. And let's see, was there anything else? No, I guess that's it. That's what I have for updates.
Great.
Okay.
Any questions or comments from council? Councilmember Rodenberg?
Yes, Jeff, can you comment on the Ryan Street lift station when that is scheduled to be complete?
Yes, that one's supposed to be completed in August. Let me triple check to make sure that Trent didn't change that, but the last I saw it was August of this year.
And-
Yes, end of
and it-
August.
And is that coming in on budget?
That is so far,
It
yes.
was a huge budget. I'm just wondering if it's coming
Yes.
in.
Yeah, I can double check to see if we've had any change orders. I haven't signed any change orders on that, though Trent may have in my absence last week. But it is coming in on budget right now. It's slow. It's a slow part. I wish I had some pictures. I'll try and get pictures of that one next time, but it's progressing. If you drive down there, the concrete for the building is all poured, and they're starting to work their way above grade level.
It was a huge hole.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Councilmember Likens.
Thank you. So Jeff, I see two big projects, both the Burnham Drive Phase 1A and then the Burnham Drive culvert replacement. And I see them kind of overlapping time-wise. Anticipated effects on traffic. Do you have any guidance on that or anticipation?
Well, when we first started this with the consultant, I know Trent and the consultant looked at impacts. There's no easy way to remove a full culvert and build a bridge.
Yeah.
Because as we know, working through the Harborview Stinson project, having one-way traffic and detours is never enjoyable. And this project will take a very long time. It's not going to be just a few months. The culvert replacement project will take most of, if not over a year. So what the contractor and what the consultant and our engineering staff has decided is that they're going to build a very narrow 2-lane bridge on one side of the road, and they're going to divert traffic over to that 2-lane bridge, and then they're going to build, which essentially that very narrow 2-lane bridge will become half of the final bridge. And then they're going to build the other half of the bridge, and then they'll have a very wide 2-lane bridge with wide shoulders, wide pedestrian paths.
Okay. Okay. Great.
So that we can keep traffic moving through. I mean, it'll still be traffic control during construction hours, but the intent is to not have a massive detour, not have a complete road closed section for this duration of the culvert replacement project.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Councilmember Wook.
Thank you. Going to the mid-block rapid flashing crosswalk system. And I understand there was supposed to be a survey completed in March. Did that happen? Do we have any results from that survey?
Oh, it was a topographic survey.
Oh,
Land survey. Yeah, a topographic survey to identify where utilities are and where grades are. And that, yeah, we have those surveys completed. You're happy to look at them, but that's probably not the survey you were thinking of.
yeah. No. Do we know, are these going to be installed, and do we know which one's going first? Where are we on this project?
They're in design right now, and let me double check. I can bring up the schedule again. I thought they were supposed to be constructed at the end of this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed that on that one.
Yes, supposed to be constructed according to our schedule currently by end of August of this year.
Okay, great. And have we looked in, going back to the Burnham thing, have we looked into making Austin a 2-way street?
We have not.
To help with the construction?
Are you talking about for the future Harborview Drive culvert replacement project?
Just on Burnham, and what's the name of that little street right by the Harbor History Museum that's one-way right now?
Yeah, well, it's right between Harbor History Museum and Donkey Creek Park is
Yes.
North Harborview.
Okay, is it possible to make that a 2-way to help with the Burnham Drive thing?
No, because of the width of the, well, it would be, I'd have to go out and double check, but I don't think we could because of the width of the bridge, the lane configuration there. I don't think there's a minimum 22 feet across that bridge that we
Okay.
could have two-way traffic.
All right, great, thanks.
Okay, well, I didn't note it, but if you haven't seen Harborview Stinson yet, if you haven't driven through there lately, you might want to at least drive or walk through there. One half of the roundabout is paved, so vehicles are traveling over half that roundabout. That's just the base layer. It's not the final lift, but the contractor's making great progress on that.
Good.
Just drove it last night. It was great.
Yeah.
Nice to see the progress.
Yes.
Jeff, I had a quick crosswalk question. Was one of those, or is one of those being installed next to, I guess, kind of past Discovery Village for the school walkers going to Swiftwater? Do you remember that request that was made? I can't remember when that was made, but because of those kids not having a sidewalk to finish going down, and it's kind of dangerous for them to cross where the existing non-lit crosswalk is.
Yeah, I remember the request. The RFPs that we're installing now are the ones that were directly identified already in the 2022 budget, which is the one next to Veterans Park and the one across Soundview near Hunt. But if we have funding available in the budget under, I think it's pedestrian safety fund, we just need to have that project identified in the tip or something. And we're getting ready to talk about the tip, I think at the May 12th study session.
Yes, I think so.
Or maybe it's the one at the, maybe it's
or May 9th, or yeah.
Yeah, it's either the April 28th or the May 12th study session. I forget. I don't have the agenda planning schedule. Maybe Josh knows, but it's coming up. To discuss the tip.
Yes, I think we should add that on.
May
I've
12th.
had a couple more citizens asking about that, who the citizens that walk their kids to Swiftwater from that kind of back, it's not Harbor Hill, but but next to Harbor Hill, that neighborhood behind Target.
Yeah.
All those little kiddos come into Swiftwater from there.
Yeah, I think that would be the time to, when Aaron Holst is going to make that presentation and note that. I mean, there is in the active transportation plan, projects like that identified. There's funding identified in the budget. I think it just needs to get on a list so that it can be moved into priority.
Okay. And I think we had ordered like extra crosswalk beacons and things just to have if we identified areas like that. Is that true? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, it's in the budget. I would have to check to see if those were ordered yet, but they were added into the budget. I'll check with that.
Great. Okay.
Councilmember
Thank you so much,
Rodenberg
Jeff.
has his hand up, Your Honor.
On those,
Okay.
on those extras, we said we could order 2 of those. And the whole idea was because they were such long lead, was to order them immediately. So I'm kind of surprised we haven't ordered them yet.
Well, I don't know if we have or haven't. I need to check on that.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jeff. Our last item is council guidelines and procedures, and that is our city clerk, Josh Decker.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me find one of my many screens that has the council guidelines, and I'll pull that up and share it with council. So in your packets, you should have received the edited version of council guidelines and procedures. What we've done with this version is, from our last 2 study sessions, anything that we've changed that seemed to have full consensus from council, those changes are not noted anymore. So it will look like it is just a natural part of guidelines. So if council wants to discuss anything that we've already settled on and bring that up again, we can do that. It's just not going to be noted, obviously, in the version that we're looking at. Share my screen here, and we'll take a look at the latest version. We have City Attorney Daniel Kenny has joined us for this part of the meeting. He can weigh in if there's any questions you have for him. In particular, I know we wanted to have him on the call for the discussion about social media policy. So he's here and prepared to weigh in on that. So we can take advantage of him while we've got him here. Is my screen share coming through okay for you?
Yes.
Okay, let me change the view on it really quickly here. All right. Just going through to the most recent new additions from our discussion after the last study session. And just a reminder, this is, assuming we can get this locked down today, we will bring this back as a resolution on April 25th, and we'll adopt it at the same time that we do the second reading of the ordinance that repeals the standing committees. So we'll be doing those two simultaneously because they kind of overlap in several areas. So that is the goal with this section today. First thing we'll go over is the new section that I've added. It's 2.3. Our last meeting, we had a lot of discussion about public comment and how it should function. And basically what I've done is taken all of the guidance we got from that meeting and put it into its own section. So it's a new section in here. And then this section will provide guidance for all of our council meetings. And then just based on the different kind of council meeting, we'll apply it differently. The key part here that I want to highlight is this third paragraph. This is based on the new Open Public Meetings Act legislation that's come through. This is going to be something that we're going to put on all of our meeting agendas. So not just the regular council meetings, but basically every time council is going to meet, we'll have this on here. It's basically just saying that if you want to make comment on this meeting, send an email to the city clerk and we'll make sure that it's provided to council. It needs to go to the city clerk email address. That way we know it's not just general comment that's going to council. The subject needs to include the words "for public comment" in the subject line, so we know that it's for council meeting comment. And then we're making it clear that the comments will be posted in the online packet. They'll be forwarded to the mayor and council members for their review, but they will not be read out loud during the meeting, with the exception that if we're holding a remote meeting, we can read them at the request of the commenter. And just a reminder that a remote meeting is a fully virtual meeting that occurs during an emergency. So like the COVID meetings that we had where we were fully remote, that's the definition of a remote meeting. So
does the meeting we're having right now qualify?
This does not qualify as well, this meeting does because we are fully remote and we are in an emergency session. Our regular council meetings would not qualify because we're actually in-person hybrid.
And Mayor, I see Councilmember Wook's hand up.
Yes.
I know she has some things she wanted to discuss about this particular issue, if I'm correct, Councilmember?
Yes, thank you so much. You know, we've learned a lot of things from this pandemic. And before the pandemic, if you were a council member and you were away on business or you were away on vacation, you were not on the dais and you had no voice and you had no vote because we did not have the capability to do that. We now have the capability, although we learned from our last council meeting that connections can go awry. And this is a good thing that we've learned because council members can be at a meeting and then they can be on business or away and they can weigh in on it. And that's really important. You know, COVID numbers are on the rise again. And we know that online doesn't work for everybody. Maybe not everybody can do online. But we do know that during COVID times when we were listening and reading comments, we didn't have a lot of comments from our citizens. We were not burdened with a lot of letters that asked to be read. Probably during the last 2 months, what did we have from citizens that wanted to be read, their letters to be read? Maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 0. So it's not really a problem for us. I hope that we will consider that time is not of the essence in listening to the words of our citizens, because inclusive democracy must be visibly highlighted or citizens lose trust in their government. Representative government with controlled comments from citizens is insufficient to build public trust. So we've been doing this. It has not been a problem. It has not made long meetings for us to listen to our public comments if they've asked to have their letter read for 3 minutes. I think it's important that it continue to do that. And I am hugely concerned that the legacy of this council is limiting public comments. And I don't think that's really what we want to be known for. I don't think that's a good thing. I think that we need to build bridges to our citizens and not put up walls for them to comment. After all, they should be able to comment, not just when we want to hear them, but when they have something to say. That's really important. So I would really like to, on this third paragraph that he's talking about in the last sentence, there's a word "not" there, and I would like the word "not" to be eliminated so that our citizens can have their letters read for 3 minutes. I think that's important. I don't think this council wants our legacy to be something that we're stopping our citizens' voice or words from being heard when they are feeling unsure about coming because COVID numbers are up, and maybe some of them are not really good on speaking online. I think it's important. I'd really like to take out the word "not" there and allow our citizens' words to be heard for 3 minutes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. I'd like to echo Jenny's comments. I thought about this quite a bit for quite a lot of time after we talked about it the last study session. I'm not sure why we would not want to read them aloud. Again, I believe what Jenny noted, and I've also noted, is that we don't get that many requests for letters to be read out loud. And I think it would be fair to let people know if your letter's being read out loud and it's 18 pages, you're going to get 3 minutes worth, and that's fair. I just don't see this as being a big problem. It seemed a little bit incongruous that we would allow letters to be read during remote meetings, but then not any other meetings. And I suspect we're going to a hybrid system anyway. I know it's going to be a while. Looks like we just got the email today from Keith that we're not getting any cameras till way after August. So I'd like to see it put back in there that upon request, they would, their letters would be read with a 3 minute limit, just like everybody else has. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think it just doesn't look that good when we say, well, we can have everybody else there reading letters or doing it in public, but not somebody that is maybe uncertain, or they stutter, or they something, and they can't read them by themselves, and they just don't want to go up in front of the podium, which is intimidating. The times I did it, I was intimidated sitting there trying to talk to the whole city council. So that's my opinion. I support Jenny and maybe writing that so that it allows it at their request and still under the same 3 minute timeline that everybody else has.
Councilmember Rodenberg.
I agree with Councilmember Wook. I think that we should take the word "not" out. And for another reason that hasn't been mentioned, and that is when those letters get read, the rest of the community gets to hear them as well. And sometimes people writing the letters will have something intelligent to say. Well, I don't mean it that way. Often they have something intelligent to say that other citizens could find some promise in. So I think we should make it as transparent as possible. Only read them when they request that they be read. So I agree with Councilmember Wook.
Councilmember Likens.
Yes, thank you. I also agree with Councilmember Wook. I thought about this after the fact, and I think about our accommodations for people with disabilities and people who may be afraid to speak up, speak on the phone. I do like that they're being included in the packet so that people can do that. And I would actually, looks like Josh, you're a step ahead of me as always. But I was just going to say written comments shall be read aloud during the meeting upon the request of the commenter. Just that looks like that's exactly what you just did. So as always, a step ahead. So that would be my suggestion. So I support it. Thanks.
Okay, great. So thank you, Josh, for making that change.
3 minutes. Okay, good.
Councilmember Wook.
No, that I was going to put in the 3 minutes. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was a majority of council, so great.
We will put that in the final version that comes to council for approval. I think most of the other language in this section is just copied and pasted from where it was in previous sections. So if there's, I'm not sure if council has any other comments on this. So the section 2.3 will be referenced in other sections of the guidelines, which I'll point out as we go along. Section or part 3 of our agenda, land acknowledgement, we've added. I think we've heard back from the tribe that they're fine with changing the land acknowledgement to read the Gig Harbor area rather than just Gig Harbor. We're all good on that. This change, what it will also do when we bring this back to adopt by resolution, we're also going to have to amend the resolution that first adopted this land acknowledgement, because that resolution has the old language. So there will be a revision included in the new resolution that revises the old resolution that said we were going to read this in October and November. So it will be a little more of a complex resolution that comes forward to you next week.
Josh, I had a quick question about the flag. Are we flying the flag all year round as well, or just in October and November? Because I think it's still down there.
It's still down there. The resolution says that we will fly it in October and November. I guess by
So
practice,
what shall we do with it the rest of the year? Where can we keep it safe?
We'll have to find somewhere to do that. Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Rodenberg.
I understand that the court uses that flag when they hold sessions on Wednesday. That's why it keeps popping back out.
Oh, okay. Do they have a separate agreement with the tribe?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It'd be fine. I guess that's up to the judge. It's her courtroom.
Okay.
We can check in with the court and find out what's going on there.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. I was just thinking we could reach back to the tribe and ask them if they mind having it out there, or if there's agreement on that.
We already did.
On the flag.
I think we talked to them about the language to be read at a council meeting. I don't know if we asked them about the flag.
But not the flag. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think the discussion about the flag might have been Councilmember Storsett. I'm not sure. I think the discussion of the flag was that they wanted that to be separate for those 2 months. So it's more of a special kind of thing. And then, but they were okay with having the land acknowledgement read at each meeting. He's not here to defend that or confirm. So we can chat about that later unless Councilmember Wilk has something to add to this flag subject.
So the flag was never mentioned to the tribe. If we wanted to extend it, that was never a question that I was the one who talked to the tribe about the language in which they were fine with. And I never approached the subject with a flag with them. So if council wants me to talk to them about it, extending that, I'll be happy to do so, but we need to get a consensus of that, I think.
We believe Councilmember Storsett asked about the flag as well.
Yeah, so I can ask him about that later on, but I think maybe we'll have Josh reach out to the tribe and ask about that. Councilmember Rodenberg?
Yeah, I just want to remind council that that's the flag of a sovereign nation. And it's not the one that we as council people took an oath to abide by. If we're going to fly the flag of founding members, we ought to have a Croatian flag, a Swedish flag up there as well. So I think the way we had it, and their preference was to make it special and just have it those 2 months, October and November.
Okay, so we'll verify with them about October, November, and let us know if you want to bring anything forward for changing that. But as I think we'll leave it as is for now, and we can move on. Josh.
The next changes are in section 9 of the agenda for public comment items. We cut out this language and moved it into that new section 2.3, and then just added that.
Josh, you've turned into a robot again. Can't understand you very well. Now we can't hear you at all. Okay, I think he's popping back on. Or no, you're still there, but we can't hear you.
All right. Well, can you hear me now?
No, it's
No.
still like robotic.
I think Josh has us on a time limit so that after a certain length of time, it goes to robot.
Maybe log off
Totally
and
gone
log back
now, Josh.
on.
We still don't hear you, Josh. You might have to log off and log back
Yeah.
on, but that blows the whole meeting, doesn't it?
No,
It
I
did
think we'll all
last time.
stay
Am I a
on.
co-host? Okay,
But don't you drop off, Tony, or we
no,
all
I'm,
leave.
I'm sitting right here.
Gotta love technology.
Got a little note here saying I am now the host.
Yep.
Okay. Councilmember Denton.
I'm gonna have to drop off in about 10 minutes. I can join in on my phone, but just a warning. I gotta get my son.
No worries.
Are you able to hear me now?
Oh,
As
yeah.
long as you're driving safely on Zoom. Yes, Josh, thank you. That's much better.
Okay. And my screen's up. Everything's good.
Yep.
Yes, we're good.
Yep.
Okay, so the new non-agenda, public comment on non-agenda items just references the section 2.3, which is the general guidelines for public comment, and then gives the specifics for the non-agenda items. Nothing new in this section, I don't think. And then we have the same reference under old business and under new business. So it just points back to that section 2.3 on public comment. Going through this, I've added a reference to the city council vote tracker. So that's in the council guidelines. I don't believe we made any changes to the advisory board section that we added at the last meeting. So everything should be good to go forward on that. And that takes us into council member communications. And I think the only thing that we had issue on with that is our section on social media. So I guess at this point, maybe I'll open it up to council to see if there's any further thoughts or ideas or discussion on this. And Daniel's here so he can weigh in on what's been proposed and what maybe would work better for you.
Councilmember Barber.
Yes, I had sent Daniel a number of questions this morning, which he kindly answered, and I was trying to figure out, and I don't know, I may be the only one, but I was trying to figure out what city business was and that type of thing, so that it was clear when what was going on a personal Facebook page or a personal Twitter page, that Twitter account, that kind of thing, when it was city business versus personal business, or versus personal account, I should say. And I think that that's something that we still, at least for me, need to clarify so that there's a real understanding of when it, as a city council person, if someone says, come down to Parks Appreciation Day, when is that city business instead of that being personal business and that kind of thing. My case may be a little different than other people's, but I have a lot of people are interested in coming to visit Gig Harbor via my page, but they're not necessarily going to come to a weekly farmers market, that kind of thing. So I think that there's some crossover that is a little confusing, and that was I'm sorry, I seem to be choking here. From Daniel's definition of promotion, it is very similar to what my own definition of promotion is. And then there were a couple of other places in here where it talks about that we need to have disclosures up. And I also wanted us to talk about restricting comments, because I have real concerns about restricting comments on social media accounts, because social media is innately social, which means that you need to have comments And if I put on my public relations hat, we don't delete comments, we don't restrict it's I have a real problem with that. So if we are going to restrict comments on our social medias, then I think that we should strongly consider not even having social media accounts, because we're losing the purpose of the whole communication tool. So that was kind of a whole bunch of comments that I have for Daniel in a nutshell.
Daniel, did you want to respond or?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, Council and Mayor. Nice to see you all.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, no, fantastic questions. I can forward my response that I sent today. You know, I wanted to get back to Councilmember Barber first directly. And so I think I have thoughts on all of those. I'm happy to go through them all right now, or we can go one at a time and get input from the rest of Council, whatever you think is most efficient and however I can help the most.
Maybe let's get other comments from Council and then try to address everything at the end of their comments for you. Just if you want to keep a list of the
absolutely.
questions. Councilmember Rodenberg.
Yes, considering that I have different friends on my personal Facebook page than I do on my city councilman's page. So I'm wondering if city business, if I just share a post that is on the Gig Harbor City site on Facebook and share it to my personal page, which actually sees more Gig Harbor residents than the other one, is that putting city business on my personal page?
Okay, great question. Do you want to, are we writing questions down and answering them at the end, or do you want to, is that what we decided, or do you want to just?
I think that's what you decided, but again, I'm happy to chunk through them as well.
Is that okay with Council if we just kind of make a list and then kind of okay, Councilmember Wook?
Yeah, so I just want to say that on my city Facebook page, I don't delete comments. I don't delete commenters. I thought that was illegal to do. So whoever makes a comment stays there, and the person stays there no matter what they say. Yeah, sometimes I comment, I re-comment to them back on my city page. Sometimes, most of the times I don't. That's just my own thing, I think. But I on my city Facebook page, if something comes before me, if something's going to come before me as a city council person that I'm aware of, or something is before me as a city council issue agenda item, that to me is that to me goes on my city Facebook page. If the city publishes something that's public, I'll probably put it on my city Facebook page, and I will probably put it on my personal Facebook page because it is made public already by the city. I don't know if anyway, that's just what I do.
Okay, anyone else have questions for Daniel? Councilmember Likens?
Yeah, it's more of just a clarifying question. I went to a social media workshop as part of one of the AWC things that we went to at the beginning of the year. And they talked about you can use it informationally, kind of one way. Here's upcoming topics, here's upcoming meetings, here's parks appreciation, those type things. But you can't put your opinion, so to speak, like what you think about what's on there, how you would vote. Is that a correct interpretation, or am I missing something there?
Okay.
And we can add that, so I know.
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, take it away, Daniel.
Great. So we'll probably start with kind of what the scope of your role as a council member is when it comes to posting on social media. But I guess I will say from the get-go, social media as a general topic is just broadly concerning to me as your lawyer for a whole range of reasons. So I'll just touch on a few of those because these themes will get woven into a lot of my responses. Number one, records retention. The city has an obligation to retain all records of the city according to the schedule adopted by the state. And so if the post is a post that would fall within the scope of your duties as a council member and is a city record, it must be retained. That takes a lot to do for social media because social media changes so quickly. And can well, it can change, it can look different. Things can be deleted, not that you would, please do not do that. But they can get deleted by the poster, they can get reported by somebody else, and Facebook can take a comment down. Just as an example of a platform, the comment can get taken down because of the reporting. Might come back later, might not, we don't know, we can't control that. And I think, and Josh can correct me, but I think you have a platform that will archive social media. I don't think that it is real time. So if something goes up and 10 minutes later, like for example, during this meeting, if somebody posts that they don't like my haircut on your Facebook page, and then they reconsider 10 minutes later and say, you know what, it's probably okay, and they delete that comment, we probably won't have a record of that, which is probably all fine and well. But as an example, it's not that real time. And so records retention is one thing. Public Records Act. It's related to retention, but is a different set of obligations to produce records of the city in response to a public records request. It is hard to do that when, for example, some of you have a personal page, some of you have a city page, and you're posting different things both inside and outside of your scope as a city council member. It's just the same as if you're using a personal cell phone or a personal computer. We're going to have to go through your social media and find what might be a city post and what might not be. And so from a public records standpoint, first of all, having a city Facebook page for you as a council member is super useful because we can just use that as the source for anything that's city related. It's like using a city device versus a personal device. So that's really important. Open public meetings is the next one. You can create a serial meeting in a lot of different ways by text message, email, phone, or social media. It wouldn't necessarily be that you all are on a single post talking back and forth in the comments. It could happen on different posts on the same topic, all on Facebook, all kind of gathering and coalescing around a discussion. And so we want to avoid that as much as possible. And then there are others, but I'll just say one more before I get into the questions. Generally speaking, city social media posts and city social media sites are limited public forums. What that means is that the public should have access to that, subject only to limited rules that you put in place in advance and that are applicable across the board. And so you would not have the ability to, and nobody has implied this, so I'm not saying that this is happening, but you would not have the ability to censor who's allowed on the page, who can comment on the page. And I know we've seen over the years public comments that are not as comfortable as other public comments, and those would need to remain on those pages. And so if you're using a personal page and somebody says something that you don't find comfortable about the city, about your work on council, about council's decision-making, whatever that may be, that's got to remain. It would be an open public forum. So sorry, that's kind of the baseline for a lot of this. So in terms of what comments would be considered within the scope of your role as a council member, there's two things that kind of come up. And these are, I'll just read these as quotes. So one, it must contain information relating to the conduct of government or the performance of any government or proprietary function. So that's one long way of saying it's got to be related to the city. The second test, when it's within the scope of your duties as a council member, is whether your position required the post, the city directed the post, or the posts furthered the city's interests. So those are pretty broad when you get down to it. Things that could come up is you guys could have an event or something like that, and at a council meeting, everybody or somebody says, we should all post about this to get the word out about this. Maybe it's a survey, maybe it's a groundbreaking, whatever it might be. Let's get some participation in this. So I would view that as the city directed the post. You all came together and said we should do this as council members. The posts furthering the city's interests is the one that's pretty broad and can catch a lot of things. The reality is most of the situations are going to be fact specific, situation specific, that we'd look and we'd say, okay, how does this role play into that? So I'll just leave that there. I can't give you a one sentence that's going to be much clearer than what I've read here. And I know that that's probably not particularly satisfying to any of you, but it's not like there's just some clear line, because you all are, residents, active residents of your community. And so you may want to talk about, the road project that's going on near your house that's causing traffic. You may also want to talk about the budget or something like that. And all of those things touch on you and your personal life, but then they also touch on very deeply onto what you do as a council member. And so we need to think about these tests to establish when you're talking as one person or a council member, and when you're just talking as an individual. So I'm sure there's probably questions on that, but I'm going to keep going because there's going to kind of be a layering on a few of these different things. So let's see here. There is a comment in here, and Josh, I don't recall specifically where it is. It's about banning certain sites. If you see it there, it's right there, right in the middle. Oh, sorry, I thought I saw it. Well, while you do it, I'm just going to read the comments. So again, they're limited public forums, and so we wouldn't be using this policy to remove or limit who can comment on those pages. Again, if it's your personal page and you're saying things that are within your scope of your role as a council member, those comments would need to stay on your personal page. And the comment the section as I read it about banning apps, tools, or sites is more related to if the city is not able to get a archiving system in place for Twitter, for example, and it's not a feasible tool available to council because we can't retain the information. Have we not found it? Where was it? Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Josh. So this is intended to say that if the mayor says from an administrative standpoint, we cannot support council using a particular tool or site, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever it might be, because of one of these many issues. We can't archive it. We can't search it for public records responses. People are able to delete it when we can't control that, or whatever it might be, that we would need to put a stop to that. That's how I read that, as opposed to people being banned or anything. Definitely not the case. And then, so in terms of adding a disclosure to your accounts, again, I don't recall exactly where that was in there, but a disclosure is going to be, even more important if you are using a personal Facebook page, right? Because people aren't going to know whether or not you're talking as a council member or you're talking as an individual. And so identifying how you're making that communication, or with what hat on you're making that communication, is going to be really important. And then it also says the policy, a clear statement that the content is subject to the PRA and public disclosure. So there's 2 statements in there related to those. Josh and I can work together to provide something to council that would satisfy that. But it's important that the public understands that I hope we all understand that what goes on social media never goes away in perpetuity, but not everybody knows that. I mean, they could be commenting on your page as a friend, and then that could be in the news the next day or the next week, because that's a public record, because that's a public forum. Somebody could request that. And I don't think, I'll just say from my own personal experience, from what I view on social media, not everybody recognizes that they are truly out in the world when they're making their comments on social media. And so that's the intent of these disclosures, is to make sure people understand that this could be produced to anybody. So then the next one, restriction of the ability to comment. So I totally appreciate and understand that one of the primary purposes of social media is to engage and in both directions. It's not just a message board where you post something up and then it's done. However, again, there are a range of issues with social media sites for all of the things that I said earlier that I won't repeat, but records retention, public records requests, etc. And so there are a number of cities that I know of that have chosen to solve those problems by trying to not have the ability to comment on those posts, because that solves many of the issues, but still allows council members the ability to post and to reach out to their constituents. And so if there are mechanisms in place that are set up to allow the archiving and the searches for records responses and whatnot, and we all understand what our lines are for the posting, then the comments might be okay. So I guess I'll just leave that there. I'm sure there's questions and I've been just talking straight. So why don't I take a pause here and see if anybody has comments in response or further discussion.
Councilmember Barber. You're on mute.
Big surprise, I had a question. So here's a question. If I created a city Facebook page, which sounds like I need to do, can I put something on my city Facebook page and then share it to my personal Facebook page and it still gets retained by the system? This may be for Josh. And is it then if I just on my personal page, if I just say, FYI, this is going on in the city, is it a personal post or a city post?
So the way I would interpret that, Daniel will have to weigh in here too, is that if I'm not the expert on Facebook, but the way that I perceive Facebook working, that when you share something from someone else onto your Facebook page, it becomes its own unique post. Like I think my understanding is you can get unique comments that are just to you related to that Facebook post. So it's creating a whole new chain. So
right,
even though you're just copying and pasting from the city's webpage or from your city's Facebook page, you're still creating a new record that would need to be preserved.
And page freezer, from my understanding from Molly way back when, is it only captures the pages that you give her your username and password for. So if you want to give your personal account username and password to the city and have your personal page captured, I think you could do that. But I think Facebook is the only one that page freezer captures. I don't think that it goes across to any other social media platform. I think it's just Facebook. Is that correct, Josh?
It also does Twitter and I think it does YouTube too. But as far as I know, Council the only social media that any of you are using is Facebook, to my knowledge. I don't think there are any other uses out there right now.
I also have a Twitter account and an Instagram account.
Okay. Yeah, I know Twitter is one that we can track. We track our own Twitter account with Page Freezer.
What about LinkedIn, Nextdoor, any of
Oh, yeah,
those?
kind of stuff.
Next door, no, I think LinkedIn might be on there.
Okay.
Does it, Josh, does it capture if a council member comments on someone else's page?
Any activity from that account. So yeah, it would, I believe.
Great.
But it has to be, the only way to be tracked is if you provide the username and password for each account. Yes, okay. Councilmember Likens.
Just quickly, so maybe we should have a line in here, and I know it's inferred that anybody that has an account notifies Josh so that he has a record of who has an account and who doesn't.
Yeah, if you're gonna have a city only account, then we should probably have it in our Page Freezer account.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Councilmember Look.
So I'm not sure I can do this, but if I were to share then from my city page to Nextdoor, it would capture that?
No, it wouldn't, not across platforms. It would, if it's all in Facebook, then it would capture it. But if you're copying and pasting into another platform, it won't.
Okay, so then that's when we need to take a page shot of if we're posting anything on Nextdoor, we need to take a page shot and email it to our city count, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. So Josh, do you want our passwords and everything for our private accounts so that can be tracked, or just
I don't think it's appropriate for the city to track your private account. So if you're using a personal account to post city related information, then you need to be responsible for that, for maintaining that, for taking the screenshots and saving them. And
okay.
So I'll do, again, I'm going to be overly concerned here. But if you're using your personal page and it is not being tracked by the system, I would be concerned that you're not able to accurately capture that information for a public records retention or public records responses. I'm skeptical that the program itself can even do that.
Yeah, I think, it's up to council, but I think just for continuity, for protection of yourselves, just not posting city business on your personal page at all is probably the best way to go. And if you want a way to communicate with your citizens, create a city page that's tracked, and then it just does it all for you. You don't have to worry about taking screenshots. You don't have to worry about comments being deleted or not deleted, just let the system track it. And then you only have one place that has to be searched. If someone says, I want to see all social media posts from this person, then you only have one place that has to be checked, and it's not your personal account. That would just be, I think, common sense in this day and age. And I hear your concerns, Daniel, and I echo them as well. Councilmember Barber.
So let's talk about the Ansich dock opening that several of us went to and posted pictures afterwards. That was a city activity, and we were there as citizens, but we were also there as council members. Is that something that should have gone on a personal page, or should that only be on a city page? And that's where I start to draw, that line gets really wonky as a communicator. I'm trying to figure out where that line is, as you know, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. And so two thoughts. Number one, I mean, I think we all acknowledge that you have lives in the city outside of being a council member, and social media is a part of that. And so, posting about an event that you went to, is that required for your position, directed by the city, or furthering the city's interests? I think the answer is generally no, right? And so, there's going to be a range of things that are just part of your life as an active resident in the city. And I would totally acknowledge that something like that's probably in that category. I think I just point out, Josh highlighted on the screen in blue, I'd point that language out, but the next sentence as well, it's not for official city business other than to informally communicate with the public. The purpose of this policy is to set parameters, well, two sides, right? City business, is governed by the city's social media policy, but even within that, what should you be doing on social media as a city council member is shown in that next sentence, and that it's really that informal communication. And I apologize, I can't remember who was a council member, Likens, who said that went to the training and basically said something similar to that next sentence that's right in the middle of that paragraph. And I think the purpose for that is, really deliberations, discussions, or you formulating your thoughts on city business is intended to be in a city council meeting. Of course, when it's the group doing that, that needs to be in a council meeting. But the point of social media policy here is to try to use social media as an informal tool to say, here's the link to this thing that we talked about in the council meeting. Here's this event that we're really excited to have going on in the city, whatever that might be. But it is not for you to write your treatise on how road improvement projects should be done in the city, and then have that also then come to council. And to me personally, I think everybody has a different opinion on this, but to me personally, that's consistent with how social media is kind of designed. It's designed to be a more informal, quicker, simpler touch. It's not the place to, write 5 paragraphs on your opinion on an upcoming vote, for example. Now, everybody uses it differently. I've seen it both ways. So
you haven't been on Twitter lately, have you?
I stay away from Twitter, that's for sure.
Well, I've seen exactly what you just described on Twitter from a whole bunch of people.
I acknowledge that, absolutely. But so anyway, so I think that second paragraph is really important to council, particularly if you adopt this policy, is to understand the parameters that you're putting on yourselves for your conduct on social media.
Councilmember Henderson.
So Josh, you'd be able to help us set up a city Facebook account, each of us, or for those that don't have it. I don't have one. I don't use much social media at all. I stay away from it just because it degrades quickly into name calling and everything else, especially on some platforms. But if that's something that I elect to do at some point, you could help with.
Oh, social media. Okay, social media. Okay.
I would say yes, we can. You can create like a Facebook account with your city email address. You create it, you create the password and provide that to us.
Okay.
If you don't have one set up now and you haven't been using Facebook, then I would maybe just recommend directing people to the city's Facebook page, which is going to be putting out pretty robust content. And if you don't have a lot of followers set up ahead of time, then it may just be easier to direct them to that rather than try to recreate the wheel. But if it's something that you want to create and foster and develop, then we can do that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Daniel? Okay, not seeing any. Did you have any other specific sections of this, Josh, of this particular social media section that were changed, or that?
This hasn't not been changed since the last time we reviewed it. Just kind of going over the discussion I think we've had with Daniel here and not really hearing any clear direction from council. I think this covers us pretty well, unless there's any changes that council has seen in here that they'd like to have, they'd like to recommend that we change. But otherwise, I think it's good to go.
I would just quickly ask Councilmember Barber, oh, I see your hand came up. If I answered all of your questions, there was overlap between things, but if I did not, please remind me.
Councilmember Barber, did you have a follow-up?
You did answer them, Daniel. And Josh, I guess the only thing that I would ask is if you could send us all that disclosure language that you would like us to use if we are doing a post that we consider to be city business.
Yeah, I'll work with Daniel and come up with something that can be kind of universally applied there.
And then maybe a list of the apps that or social media platforms that can be captured by Page Freezer and those that cannot. And then I guess, I know Daniel had a pretty serious concern about people trying to capture their own public records. So if it is an app that is not covered by Page Freezer, maybe council needs to decide whether or not those platforms are allowed or not. Because right now it says that the mayor decides if that platform is not covered and it cannot be tracked, then that application or that platform is banned. If council's okay with that language, then we can leave it that way. And if Josh comes back and says, okay, Nextdoor is not covered, LinkedIn's not covered, then we just say, okay, then you are not allowed to post or have an account that can't be tracked. So if you want to clear up that language or change that language in any way, I think that just needs to be clear. If council's comfortable with capturing their own public records, but it's our legal advice is leaning toward not being comfortable with that. So Daniel, did you want to clarify that type of?
Just one clarification. There are records that are considered transitory records that have no retention value. And so I'd have to look, and I can work with Josh to do this, on whether a tweet it would be something that doesn't have retention value. And so there may be some that from just the retention side of things will be easier to deal with. So when I heard you restate what I said, which was totally exactly what I said, I was like, well, maybe there's probably a little bit of wiggle room there for records that, have that lesser value and that have shorter timelines, if not no timeline. So I'll work with Josh to confirm what the records retention schedule says for some of these categories. I don't recall off the top of my head if they've gotten specific enough to say tweets as opposed to Facebook posts. But I guess we can see. And Josh, if you know off the top of your head, of course, but I do not in this moment.
Yeah, the transitory records from the core, I don't think defines them as by platform or, if it's a Facebook post or a tweet. It's more focused on the content. If the content is something that's benign and not really, really a long-term city record, the definition is very vague on what's a transitory record and what's not. So that's something we can look into. And if you're trying to interpret what a transitory record is, then probably isn't a transitory record. Just we try to define it very narrowly, so we're not calling records transitory that aren't transitory records. So
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'm sure that's clear as mud for everyone.
Some ever would.
Yeah, not so clear for me. So I would like to be able to use Nextdoor. So let me know. And I don't use it on a regular basis, but I do. If there's something that the city puts out, a lot of times I'll put that on Nextdoor, especially when it comes to traffic is getting better. So let me know what I need to do in order to, if you want me to take pictures of that page, let me know. I like to continue to use it. Thank you.
Yeah, I do know that Nextdoor is not one that we can track.
Yeah, right. So I would have to do my own page shot. I get it. That's fine with me.
Councilmember Barber. You're on mute.
I would just like to say that I would like the responsibility to remain with the mayor as far as banning sites, because social media changes so often. And I think that the ability to capture may change also. And that seems to be the quickest way to adapt to those changes, rather than making something that's more cumbersome or making a list right now. And if Josh can just keep us apprised of what we need to capture or what we can send to the city with our own mechanisms too. And if we do a screen capture, do we keep that or does it go to Josh?
You should keep those. At least don't send them to me one at a time. You know, if you can keep them for several months and then compile them for me, then that makes it a little easier for me.
Okay.
Typically what will happen if we ever do get a request for your records, if someone wants to, wants all records from Councilmember Barber, we will ask you to provide anything to us that we won't already have. So we'll have you fill out an affidavit form that says I've provided all of the records that I have to the city. So if we ever had a request, that's when you would provide those to us. But if you're going along and saving them and you get a bunch and want to transfer them over for me to hold for you, then I could do that.
Councilmember Likens.
Yeah, thank you. So Josh, can you clarify, we're elected positions and I don't have city accounts, but I did have election accounts, campaign accounts on Facebook, Instagram, etc. Because innately you're going to be talking about the city. If you run, let's say 4 years from now and I'm running again and I re-up those sites, do those follow under the same kind of open public meeting if you're already elected, like Lee for next year if he wants to run again type thing, or Mary?
So I would say that if we do get a request for Councilmember Rodenberg's emails, if he's running for office and somebody down the road says they want to know everything that he said about city business, then we would have to determine from his emails, if they're strictly related to his campaign, then maybe they're not city business. But we would have to make that, there would have to be some discretion applied to those because he is technically a city council member and his records would be disclosable.
So then the social media accounts would be as well?
Yep.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, so Josh, do you need any direction or just leave it as it is and it'll be up for adoption at the May meeting or April meeting? End of April.
I think we'll leave this as it is. We'll bring it back on the April 25th meeting for adoption by resolution. And it's probably something that we will be revisiting in the years ahead and figuring out what works and what doesn't work for council. And yeah, okay. I think we'll go from there. And I think that pretty much sums up the changes that we have. I've highlighted the section on lobbying efforts. This really hasn't changed. I think there was one tweak that I made in here just to stress that council has to formally take a position on a matter before council members represent themselves on behalf of the city. But I think this is substantially the same as what we talked about before. And then the other new section that we've added is the proclamation policy, and that has not changed since the last time we talked.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll bring this back at the April 25th meeting. It'll be by resolution. The resolution will just repeal the old version of this and adopt a brand new version. So you won't see any of the strikeout underline changes because we've made so many revisions since the last one. It'll just be a new clean copy for you. So if there's any discussion at that meeting, then we'll work off the clean copy.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thanks. I'd like to thank Josh for doing this. This is a heck of a lot of work and it's a great start. And it's good to know we can go back and tweak it as time goes on, which should be true of everything. So thank you so much for doing this, Josh. I know it's been a lot of work and it is appreciated by all of us.
Absolutely. This makes everyone's job a lot easier when we know the ground rules
and thank you for saying that. I couldn't agree more, Councilmember Anderson. Josh, well done.
Yep. Very, very well done. Good work and much appreciated. And Daniel, thank you for being here as well. We appreciate your expertise as always.
Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Anything else for the good of the order? Councilmember Rodenberg?
Yeah, I missed a little bit of that because I was tweeting about Daniel's haircut, but I'll catch up later.
Looks very nice, by the way, Daniel.
Thank you.
Nice. I like that.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
meeting is adjourned. Good afternoon, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right. Take
Good
care.
night.